Well, it's a good thing I've got this helmet on for safety. Otherwise, I'd have treble pneumonia. Welcome back to Random. We got a word back from our sponsor, Team Them Damn Newt Boys Woo. The truth of the matter is they're kind of in the middle of some really big projects, so they haven't really been able to support the channel as they would have liked. But that's okay, because they tell us one of the big projects that's coming up is actually going to be featured in an upcoming episode here. So I'm not too upset about that, but that's okay. So my editor and I have been testing out some coffee from Black Rifle Coffee Company. This is called Dictator Geisha. He didn't actually let me drink it. He actually let me have the coffee grounds after the coffee was brewed. But it was still pretty good. You know, Dictator Geisha has got a really unique flavor. It's basically like pouring a freshly baked blueberry muffin into your face. So it's actually really good. It's a really good coffee from what I'm told, at least as far as eating the coffee grounds after it's been brewed, but my editor, what are you gonna do? So today's episode is about the electromagnetic spectrum. Now, it's measured in nanometers, okay? So that's 1/1000th of a meter. And it's really, really small. As you can imagine, 1/1000th of a meter is tiny, right? So the electromagnetic spectrum starts in the gamma range with 10 to the negative 12 nanometers to 10 to the negative 10th nanometers in frequency. It's a high energy, high frequency photons, and they carry so much energy simply because of their frequency and because of their energy rate, right? And it's part of what we call ionizing radiation, right? So it's the start of ionizing radiation. That section of the electromagnetic EM spectrum starts with gamma and ends at ultraviolet. But yeah, gamma radiation, fantastic stuff, really high energy, and it's also really damaging. So when we talk about things like alpha and beta particles, gamma rays actually hit atoms and cause alpha and beta particles to be exuded from those atoms. Really dangerous stuff. So when you talk about gamma ray bursters or bursts, one of the most powerful naturally occurring phenomenon in the universe, that is where concentrated gamma rays will blast the planet atmosphere and basically cook it away. Really dangerous stuff, but also really interesting. So after 10 to the negative 10 nanometers, you got 10 to the negative 8 nanometers. That's where the X-rays start. Now, of course, X-rays being used to go through something and reflect off of or bounce to produce an image on film, right? That's where X-ray technology comes from. What's interesting about that is aluminum completely absorbs X-rays. X-rays cannot see through aluminum at a certain frequency. So that's kind of interesting. X-rays start at 10 to the negative 8 nanometers per second and go to 10 to the negative 6 nanometers per second. So it's a lower frequency, it's a lower energy than gamma, but it's still pretty hazardous to human health. You don't want to be exposed to X-rays for very, very long if it can be avoided. So after X-rays, we have ultraviolet rays. They start at 10 to the negative 6th nanometers and go to 10 to the negative 7th nanometers in frequency. Is that negative 6 or negative 4? That's negative 7, okay. So ultraviolet radiation. It's the lowest frequency of ionizing radiation. That means pure ultraviolet light can ionize gases, all right? So that's your hydrogens, that's your heliums, that's your argons, your CO2, and so on and so forth. And that basically creates a charged cloud. And ultraviolet radiation is one of 3 radiations that can cause that. It can excite atoms to a plasma state. So that's kind of cool. We'll use ultraviolet light in a lot of applications, particularly for sterilizing equipment. So you know those lights you see in the back of bakeries or delis at supermarkets? Those are ultraviolet light. And ultraviolet light kills bacteria and germs and different viruses and things like that. So that's pretty useful. It's also used to fluoresce certain fluids, petroleums, and so on for crime scenes and stuff. It's really good for finding leaks in like air conditioning systems because the dye is phosphorescent. It glows under black light. So ultraviolet light is very useful to us for a number of different reasons. Fantastic stuff, right? So the visible spectrum of light starts at 4 by 10 to the negative 7 nanometers to 7 by 10 to the negative 7 nanometers, right? So that starts just after the ultraviolet range, and it goes from violet to blue to green to yellow, orange, and red, and it ends at the start of the infrared range. Now, infrared radiation actually, that's a little later in the spectrum. That's lower frequency. It's lower energy, lower frequency, but it actually has more effect on the environment around it. It's a bit like ionizing radiation. You can't see it, but we know it's there because of its effects. All right, so infrared radiation starts at 10 to the negative 4th nanometers and goes 10 to the negative 2 nanometers. And it's a lower frequency, lower energy photon, right? Now, infrared photons will heat up things that they're directed at. And there's an experiment I'll talk about a little bit later in the episode where that was discovered. So after infrared, you have microwave, right? So that's everything from radar, that's everything from the microwave on your kitchen counter, that's Bluetooth, that's a very low energy photon, but it can carry information with it, right? So there was a theory that Hedy Lamarr had, a famous actress and inventor, where you could use microwave energy to transmit information. And that's where we get Bluetooth from. Bluetooth technology is powered by microwaves. Really interesting that. So after microwave, we have radio. That's your AM, that's your FM, that's your XM, that's all of that frequency of radio. So that's FM and AM and so on. And it was there that we discovered that you could transmit things like voice, you could transmit TV, you could transmit information via radio waves, remote control, so on. That was all from radio frequencies. And it comes after radar and all the really fun stuff. And when you talk about radar, and particularly for avionics troops, when somebody uses a radar and they walk in front of the array, they get cooked. That's because they get hit by high frequency and high concentration of microwaves from the radar. All right, so the starting studies for the electromagnetic spectrum actually began in ancient Greece, where they determined that light could be reflected or refracted. It really didn't start kicking until Newton came along and showed that light could be split and recombined into white light. So that's where he put prisms together and determined that white light was actually Roy G. Biv instead of just white light. So it could actually be broken down into the visible light spectrum. Again, it starts in ultraviolet and ends in infrared. So it starts purple and then it shifts red. And then in 1800, William Herschel discovered infrared, right? So we talked a little bit about that before. What he discovered was when you split light into its primary colors, beyond the red area is actually where things start getting warmer, right? So he put a thermometer on a wall where that area was, and he noticed that the temperature was much higher there than it was anywhere else on the spectrum. And he theorized that infrared energy, the infrared photons, were causing that thermometer to rise. And he was right. Now, in 1801, John Ritter went the other direction and for ultraviolet. And he discovered ionizing radiation, otherwise known as chemical rays, right? And the reason he called it that, or the reason people called it that, was because ultraviolet radiation had the effect on matter where it would change certain properties, ionize them, and cause different things to combine or decombine. It wasn't until 1820 where electromagnetism study began in earnest, right? So that's where all the really fun stuff happened. It's where we discovered that only energy can absorb or redirect energy. Michael Faraday, famous for his Faraday cage, discovered that light passing through a transparent material was affected and reacts to magnetic fields. And so that's where we get the idea for energy shields in science fiction. So Star Trek, Star Wars, and so on, they all use electromagnetic or energy shields to protect themselves against energy attacks. And that includes radiation, that includes gamma, that includes ultraviolet, that includes X-ray. Energy absorbs energy. And there was an experiment that the Russians did back in the Cold War where they wrapped an aircraft in a low temperature plasma, and it absorbed all radar energy directed at it. And it worked until that plasma shield failed and it burned the aircraft to bits. And then, of course, it wrecked. Anyway, the theory was proven correct and it worked. Now, all aspects of the electromagnetic spectrum are photons. Okay, so that's your gamma, that's your X-ray, that's your ultraviolet, all the way down to radio, the lowest energy photons we know of, and they all travel at the speed of light. That's right, a photon of low amplitude, low frequency AM is still a photon. Now, the reason it travels as a wave is because of the structure of atoms, all right? So a photon will strike an atom and it won't necessarily go in a straight line. So from our perspective, a photon will travel in a straight line as a wave, as it is absorbed and redirected by whatever atoms it hits. And that includes out in space. Now, space isn't pressurized at 14.7 psi, but we call that a vacuum. It's not. Space is just not pressurized. Nature abhors a vacuum, right? So there's dust, there's gas, there's all kinds of different things out in outer space that photons bounce into and react from. Hence, a photon is a particle, but it travels as a wave because it is bounced by all the atoms in the universe. So it's pretty interesting stuff. Now, unfortunately, that's all the notes that my editor gave me for this episode. If you got anything out of this, if you learned anything, please like, subscribe, and comment down below. And also check out Beer and Song of the Day by Josh Baker. He's a buddy of my editor, and, well, he needs all the help he can get on his YouTube channel because he's starting that back up again. And also, don't forget to check out Black Rifle. They're not a sponsor of us yet, but they still make a good product, and they help out veterans more than the VA or the federal government ever could. So, remember, keep your helmets on for safety and keep it random.